My friend Joe Clark came from a tiny place in the mountains, Cumberland Gap, Tennessee. Though he moved away young to make a living, his heart never left. And through his camera, the world came to know his beloved hills and hollows and his people in both Appalachia and in America's industrial heartland of Detroit. Joe's greatest gift wasn't his technical skill of a master photographer, though he certainly was that. Joe Clark had a way of capturing the extraordinary in ordinary moments. Every picture tells a story, Joe liked to say. And one frame at a time, Joe Clark told some of the best American stories. Stories about the regular folks, about quiet craftsmanship, about the pride of the place.
We wanted to revisit the place that held an almost mythical connection to Joe Clark. But before ever touching down in Tennessee, we immersed ourselves for months in the Appalachian way of life. River baptisms, hoedowns in the barn, blacksmiths repairing wagon wheels, families harvesting grain, church weddings, mountain funerals, whiskey stills in wooded hollows, and a 10-year-old mountain boy named Jimmy Powell, who Clark considered the Daniel Boone of his time. When we arrived in Cumberland Gap, we naively expected to be thrust into the world we'd seen in Joe's pictures. But of course times had changed. Instead of a rural enclave buzzing with coal miners and farmers, we encountered a tourist town with seemingly little remaining of the land that Joe loved.
Yet as the days passed, as we hung out in Johnny Adams' machine shop and his chicken coop, at the old Montgomery grocery store, at the Harrogate barber shop, or with Fletcher and Tricia, we began to understand that the people were much the same, that they loved to pass time telling old stories, that hard work was a way of life, that the land, infinite green hills and valleys, trout-filled streams and thick woods filled with deer, was what made them feel alive. They cherished family and friends as gifts greater than anything else the world has to offer. Toward the end of our stay, we tracked down the famous mountain boy from Joe's pictures, Jimmy Powell. At 67 years old, he's still legendary in the region. He showed us that the humble spirit that Joe Clark captured in his photos of the people of Cumberland Gap still endured.
The first time Joe raised a camera, his photos were good enough for Life magazine. And yet, Joe always called himself the hillbilly snapshooter. His enduring subjects were simple things: the warmth of home, the value of craftsmanship, the power of good friendships. So Joe was a natural choice for photographer when Jack Daniels developed its first ad campaign in the 50s, focusing on the distillery and its people in Lynchburg, Tennessee. Joe hired on, and over the next 38 years, his images helped transform the company's product from barely known to the world's best-selling whiskey. Yet Joe never acted like a big-time photographer. He was always just Joe. Around Lynchburg, in the rickyard, by the still house, around the barrel trucks, Joe greeted folks by name. He shared laughs. Everyone soon forgot about the camera and the master in their midst. Like Jack Daniels, Joe's magic wasn't so much about making whiskey or taking pictures as about sustaining relationships.
Much like others in Cumberland Gap, Jim Powell was skeptical of us when we first met. But soon we piled into his beat-up silver truck and headed into the hills to go fishing in Powell River. Along the way, Jim recalled many of his boyhood adventures shot by Joe Clark. He pointed out the exact spot where he chopped down a tree to score some honeycomb, the tree vines where he swung like Tarzan, the very rock in the stream where 60 years ago he cut off a snapping turtle's head after snatching it with his bare hands. As we got to know Jimmy, he seemed to morph into the boy we'd seen in pictures. "I just can't get it in my head that I'm old," he told us. "If I did, I'd shoot myself." As we explored the backwoods, Jim soon concocted the idea that we should return to relive his boyhood adventure with Joe Clark. 3 days in the hills with nothing but the clothes on our backs, living off the land the old way, eating only what we kill ourselves. He couldn't stop grinning at the thought of teaching us to grapple with snapping turtles. And so on our last day in Cumberland Gap, we didn't say goodbye, but we'll see you soon. Our short time with Jimmy Powell and the people of Cumberland Gap taught us something important. These are folks who care deeply about their place, about their families, about their community. These are people who we came to care about too. And that's why we promised to return to the hollers that Joe Clark loved.
He showed us something important about what's best in ourselves. And that's why I'm here to honor my dear friend of long, Joe Clark.
And that's why we've invited Joe Clark's friends and family to the 8th Annual Mayborn Conference to celebrate and honor Joe Clark's work and legacy now and forever.